5 years ago, my parents threw me out of the only home I'd ever known because they decided I had become too expensive to keep. My name is Sophie Bennett. I'm 30 years old. 5 years ago, my parents stood in the doorway of the house I'd grown up in and watched as I loaded everything I owned into the trunk of my 12-year-old sedan. My mother folded her arms across her chest and said, "Maybe being on your own will finally teach you responsibility." My father never looked me in the eyes. He simply handed me the spare key and told me to leave it on the kitchen counter before I drove away. The reason was brutally simple. Our family furniture business had started losing money, and my parents decided I had become an expense they couldn't justify. My mother even said my room, my groceries, and every dollar spent on me were money the family could no longer afford to waste. My younger brother, Ethan, stayed comfortably in the house because, according to them, he was the future of the company. I was just the daughter who asked too many questions and apparently cost too much to keep. I remember sitting in my car that first night in the parking lot of a 24-hour grocery store, staring through the windshield while rain tapped against the glass. I had less than $400 in my bank account, no apartment, and nowhere to go. That was the moment I realized something terrifying. Being abandoned by your own family hurts far more than being broke. I kept replaying my mother's final words. "Don't come back until you've made something of yourself." By then, they didn't even sound angry anymore. They sounded like a challenge I had never agreed to accept. The next morning, I called every friend I could think of. Most couldn't help. One finally offered me an old couch in a tiny apartment across town. I accepted without hesitation because pride doesn't matter when you have nowhere to sleep. As I carried my single suitcase inside, I made one promise to myself. If I ever built a life worth being proud of, it would never depend on the approval of the people who had thrown me away. At the time, I believed that chapter of my life was over. I had no idea that 5 years later, the same parents who told me I was nothing but a financial burden would show up at my front door, desperate for something they once swore I'd never have. The months that followed tested me in ways I never expected. By day, I worked as a sales associate in a furniture showroom. By night, I slept on my friend Melissa's worn-out couch, trying not to overstay my welcome. My paycheck disappeared almost immediately. Rent, groceries, gas, and student loans left barely enough to survive. Some nights, I skipped dinner just to make it to payday. But being broke wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was realizing my parents had erased me from their lives. On my birthday, I kept checking my phone, hoping it would ring. Midnight came and went. Nothing. At Thanksgiving, Ethan posted smiling family photos online as if I'd never existed. On Christmas, I sent my mother a simple message wishing her well. She replied with only 3 words. "Take care, Sophie." That was the day I stopped waiting for my family to change. Instead, I changed. After work, I spent every night taking free business courses and learning everything I could about marketing, finance, and running a company. On weekends, I volunteered to help small businesses with their social media, gaining experience one project at a time. 2 years later, that hard work earned me a job at a growing home decor company. By my 4th year, I'd become operations manager. Every bonus went into a savings account labeled Future. Then, one rainy Tuesday, my former manager called. "A small custom furniture workshop is for sale," he said. "It's old and barely surviving. But I thought of you." Most people would have walked away. Standing inside that dusty workshop, I knew I couldn't. For the first time in years, I wasn't building someone else's future. I was building my own. What I didn't know was that this forgotten little workshop would soon become the one thing standing between my parents and complete financial ruin. 3 weeks later, I signed the papers. Everyone said I was making the biggest mistake of my life. The workshop had outdated machines, only 3 employees, and more unpaid invoices than paying customers. Even the bank manager hesitated before approving my loan. "Businesses like this rarely survive," he warned. Maybe he was right. But I'd already survived losing everything. Failure didn't scare me anymore. For the next year, my life revolved around that workshop. I answered customer emails before sunrise, worked on the shop floor until evening, and stayed up late learning everything I could about marketing, online sales, and custom furniture. Slowly, the orders started coming in. One satisfied customer became 5. 5 became 50. Soon, our handcrafted furniture was being shipped across the country. 5 years after my parents had forced me out, that forgotten workshop had become one of the fastest-growing custom furniture companies in the state. We employed more than 60 people, had a 3-month waiting list, and had just signed our biggest contract yet with a national hotel chain. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving. I was unstoppable. Then my phone rang. The caller ID froze me. Dad. I hadn't seen his name on my screen in 5 years. I almost let it ring out. Almost. When I answered, his voice sounded nothing like I remembered. It was tired, defeated. Sophie, he said quietly, I know I don't deserve to ask, but the family business is collapsing. We've lost almost everything. I said nothing. The silence stretched between us until he finally whispered the words I had once dreamed of hearing. We need your help. 5 years earlier, they had thrown me out because they believed I was worthless. Now, after losing everything, they believed I was the only person who could save them. 2 days later, my receptionist called. Sophie, your parents are here. They said it's urgent. I took a slow breath before telling her to send them in. When the door opened, I barely recognized them. My father's shoulders were slumped, his face lined with exhaustion. My mother, who had always carried herself with quiet confidence, couldn't even meet my eyes. As they stepped inside, their gaze drifted across the floor-to-ceiling windows, the awards on the shelves, and finally the company logo behind my desk with my name beneath it. I didn't expect this, my mother whispered. No, I replied calmly. 5 years ago? The silence between us was almost unbearable. Finally, my father spoke. We're in serious trouble, Sophie. Orders have disappeared. The bank is preparing to foreclose. If we don't find an investor within a month, we'll lose the business your grandfather built. My mother quickly stepped forward. We know we made mistakes, she said. But we're still your family. Families don't abandon each other. I looked at her without saying a word. Then I asked quietly, Was I family when you threw me out with nowhere to sleep? Her eyes dropped to the floor. I don't remember my family leaving me alone in a grocery store parking lot. Neither of them answered. Instead, my father slid a folder across the desk. Inside were unpaid loans, legal notices, and pages of financial losses. As I turned another page, one name immediately caught my attention. CEO, Ethan Bennett. The numbers told the rest of the story. Years of reckless decisions had driven the company to the edge of bankruptcy. I slowly closed the folder. So this isn't about believing in me, I said. It's about the son you chose over me. I looked from my father to my mother. Your favorite child couldn't save the business. So now you've come to the daughter you abandoned, hoping she'd clean up his mess. My mother opened her mouth to respond. No words came out, because we all knew the truth. I wasn't the child they wanted. I was simply the last one they had left. My mother lowered her head for the first time in my life. There were no excuses left. No explanation could erase the last 5 years. My father stared silently at the folder between us, as if the numbers inside could somehow undo the choices they'd made. Finally, he looked at me. I was wrong, Sophie, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I failed you. I chose the wrong person to lead the company, and I wasn't the father you deserved. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I'd waited years to hear those words, but they didn't erase the night I slept in my car. They didn't erase the birthdays. They forgot or the Christmas message that ended with only 3 words. Take care, Sophie. I stood and walked to the window overlooking the workshop below. Employees moved from station to station, building something together. 5 years ago, I had nowhere to sleep. Today, they had nowhere else to turn. After a long silence, I faced them again. I'll help save the business." Relief instantly filled both of their faces. "But not the way you think. I placed a contract on the desk. If I invest, I become the majority owner. I appoint the management team. Every financial decision requires my approval." Ethan steps down immediately, and from this day forward, every position in this company is earned, not inherited. No exceptions, not even for family. The room fell silent. My mother read every page with trembling hands before sliding the contract to my father. Without saying a word, he signed. She signed right after him. 6 months later, the company was profitable again. Every employee kept their job. The debts were under control. And customers who had nearly given up on the business came back because they trusted the changes we made. Ethan found work at another company. Wherefore, the first time in his life, he had to earn every opportunity on his own. As for me, I never moved back into my parents' world. I simply built a better one. I didn't win because they lost. I won because I refused to become the person they believed I was. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't watching the people who hurt you fall. It's rising so high that the only way they can move forward is by admitting you were the one they should have believed in all along. If you've ever had to prove your worth to the people who doubted you most, subscribe to Revenge Diaries, where every story reminds us that karma may be slow, but it never forgets.